morning, Spanish River. Over these last few years, our school's administration has allowed me the opportunity to bring stories of the Holocaust to you each year to commemorate and honor the memory of millions of survivors and victims of one of the darkest periods of human history. We have heard from people who were adults and survivors of the worst of the Nazis' death camps. We have heard stories of those that were little children and the horror and terror they experienced being hidden by fellow Europeans who cared about their neighbors. We have had students provide poetry, songs, and orchestral music to memorialize those that suffered during the Holocaust. This year, in an effort to illustrate how close our own community is connected to this tragic event, we have several stories to feature Spanish River and its connection to the Holocaust. We have a couple of students who will share their family stories and how they experienced the Holocaust. We have a couple of our very own faculty who will talk about the opportunities they had being able to travel to the sites of this massacre and to talk about what they learned from these experiences. Before we begin, I want to share a brief synopsis of why it is so important we continue to talk about and teach about this tragedy. Frida Jaffe was born in Poland, and her childhood, like so many millions of others, was stripped away from her by the perpetrators of the Holocaust. Frida will briefly explain why she tells her story, why so many tell their stories, and why it is important we listen to these stories.
I would like to introduce myself, and all of you are going to know me as Frida, but actually the rest of the world prior to this famous time and place is Fredzia. Fredzia is my Polish name. I'm going to tell you that it's very difficult for me to realize that I've been speaking and writing about my so-called childhood. This is a childhood that I define by the Holocaust. The Shoah, we call that. And it's been for over 45 years that I've been doing that. But what's totally surreal to me is the realization that I am the last generation, one of the very few remaining living witnesses of the Jewish Holocaust, when Jewish children were the first to be eradicated from Europe's Jewish life. And soon, who knows how soon, we too will be gone, out of our lives, out of our memories, and we'll just be a footnote, hopefully, in history books. And so in light of all of that, I am labeled a survivor. I don't own or relate to that term. I had absolutely nothing to do with my survival. I only know that I survived death. And that big realization came to me many, many years later. All of this, my survival, liberation, whatever we want to call it, happened. I was 7 years old, all alone. The Holocaust will remain a part of my life for as long as I live. It lives within my body, my mind, my soul. The nightmares absolutely refuse to go away. The images and the memories have a permanent home inside of me. And believe it or not, I honor and even cherish these images and memories because they define my survival. They are me. That's who I am. And because of this definition of survival, I have to speak. I must write in order to honor, to memorialize the lives of my entire family. They, the memories, the thoughts, the feelings, they are me. And because of this, I must speak and I must write in order to honor, to memorialize that entire family that I never knew, that I never had a part of. If I don't do this, who will?
Hello, my name is Lila Minton, and I will be talking about my great-grandparents and great-great-grandma that were part of the Holocaust. My great-grandpa, Max Birkin, lived in Austria. He eventually got married and had my great-grandma, Frances Birkin. She was an only child when World War II started. She met a man named Leo Imler, and they got married. Leo was a doctor in Austria before the Nazis began to take control over everything. Both of my great-grandparents were Jewish. They then started to run from the Nazis. They escaped the Holocaust in Austria, moving through multiple countries in the late 1930s. They left from Italy to the United States in 1941, but they were denied entry in Key West. They were then sent to the Dominican Republic, where they lived for multiple years until they were permitted to immigrate to the U.S. in 1946. My great-grandparents survived and moved to New York City. Unable to practice medicine, my great-grandfather was employed in the textile industry. His parents died in the concentration camps. My great-grandfather's two brothers also moved to the USA. His sister moved to Israel following the war. My family would want people to stay connected and not fight over power to avoid a repetition of the Holocaust.
Regarding who in my family was subjected to the Holocaust, it was many. However, only my great-grandmother Hannah, or Henshi, great-grandfather Erno Grunfeld survived. My great-grandfather changed his name to Ernest Greenfeld as part of the naturalization process. My family was situated in Czechoslovakia before the Holocaust, which is today known as Czech Republic and Slovakia. My great-grandmother had 12 brothers and sisters combined who lived on a farm together. They owned a convenience store. My great-grandfather was the youngest of his siblings who lived in a humble farm town in Czechoslovakia, similar to my great-grandmother. Their collective experience was awful. Like many Jewish people, they were subjected to horrible treatment, such as my great-grandmother standing in a similar vehicle to a cattle car, forced to stand for days with no water, food, bathroom, or even a place to sit because of how cramped it was. Her family was taken to Auschwitz, where everyone except her and one brother was killed. They lived in Barak 22. Before everyone except my great-grandmother and her brother was killed, I'd hear a story of how, due to the Nazis killing the ill, as a result of them not being able to do as much labor, my great-grandmother would rub beets on her sister's cheeks to make her look healthy, but in the end, her attempts were futile. On the other end, my great-grandfather was taken to Birkenau, where he was forced to dig tunnels for the Nazis so they would build underground tank motor. And unfortunately, this is all I know about his experience due to him being reluctant to share his story in comparison to my great-grandmother, who was very outspoken about it. When everything was said and done, my great-grandmother and great-grandfather were finally liberated after years of persecution. It wasn't until much later that my great-grandmother and great-grandfather met at a place that had a likeness to a bar, and my great-grandmother was being hit on by a Russian soldier asking if she'd dance with him, so after she refused, he started to try and rough her up. However, my great-grandfather saved her, and they moved to Cleveland together, then relocated permanently to New York, and my great-grandmother lived as a housewife as well as taught at high schools in Long Island about her experience as a survivor. My great-grandfather was a chicken plucker, and he saved enough money to then open a butcher shop. The message, as well as the lesson I want to spread, is it is never appropriate to discriminate against someone based on their identity or beliefs. Schools have an obligation to teach their students, and these are very important stories that should be told. It's crucial that we tell these stories in schools in light of how certain areas of education are limited and restricted. For this reason, both my great-grandmother and I speak up in schools.
I'm here with senior Sydney Kreitman. Both of their grandmother's parents survived the Holocaust, and we are fortunate to be here today to tell you their stories. Before the war, their great-grandmother, Bluma Abramson, lived in Lodz, Poland, and her great-grandpa, Gershon Rafalowitz, lived in Wrocław, Poland. As the Holocaust began, Bluma and her two sisters, Hella and Haya, and their mother Miriam were forced from their home and placed in the Lodz ghetto, where one sister was killed. Bluma managed to make it through Auschwitz, Dachau, and other concentration camps by doing everything she could to survive. There was an instance where she was put in charge of peeling potatoes and snuck those skins back to her barracks to eat because they were given so little food. Their great-grandfather stayed in Poland working as a barber until the Nazis finally took and separated him from his wife and daughter, leaving him as the only survivor. He passed through the Dachau and Buchenwald camps where he lied about being a bricklayer to avoid being killed and was put to work instead. After having his life spared, he made it known that he was a former barber, which let him gain a much more secure job, cutting the hair of incoming laborers, and even received better treatment in the camp because of this position. Towards the end of the war, their great-grandfather was liberated by the Russians. We are unaware of who liberated their great-grandmother. After their liberation, the two met in a displaced persons camp somewhere in Germany, where they had Sid's grandmother and left to start a new life in the Bronx on February 25th, 1949.
The Holocaust is a stunning reminder of tragic results of prejudice and hate towards other people. But it is also a reminder that hope held firm will eventually reign victorious over the greatest of odds. The following words were inscribed on the walls of a cellar in Cologne, Germany, where Jews were hiding from the Nazis during World War II. Hope was all that they had to hold on to. Hope was their only bridge to a brighter tomorrow.
I was a senior in high school, I was afforded the opportunity to walk in the footsteps of those who were murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. This journey, called the March of the Living, took me to Poland, where I witnessed the actual sites of some of the greatest crimes ever waged against humanity, and to Israel, where I witnessed what could only be described as Phoenix rising from the ashes. Though it was nearly 30 years ago, I still remember lining up under the gates to Auschwitz, the gates I'd seen in photos and films hundreds of times before. In German, the gates read, Arbeit macht frei, which translates to work will make you free. We know now that this couldn't have been farther from the truth. Leading the march was the contingency from Israel. Behind them, 6,000 Jewish teens representing 41 countries lined up to walk, arm in arm toward Birkenau, all of us wearing our blue jackets. What was the death march during the Holocaust was symbolically being recreated as a show of will. Hitler was unsuccessful and the Jewish people were alive and thriving. Walking through the gates of Auschwitz and witnessing the remnants of the gas chambers and the shooting wall, I was confronted with the unimaginable horrors that took place there. The scratch marks on the walls, the piles of human ashes, and the stories of millions of lives lost served as a stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the devastating consequences of hatred and prejudice. But amidst the darkness, there were also moments of hope and resilience. The March of the Living itself was a powerful symbol of defiance against the Nazis' attempt to annihilate the Jewish people. The lessons I learned from this experience are ones that I believe are crucial for our students to understand. Firstly, we must never forget the atrocities of the Holocaust. It is our responsibility to ensure that the memory of those who perished lives on, and that the stories of their suffering and resilience are passed down to future generations. Secondly, we must actively combat hatred, prejudice, and discrimination in all its forms. The Holocaust did not happen overnight. It was the result of years of dehumanization and the normalization of hatred. By teaching our students about the dangers of prejudice and the importance of empathy and acceptance, we can work towards creating a more inclusive and compassionate society. Lastly, we must instill in our students a sense of responsibility to stand up against injustice. The Holocaust serves as a stark reminder of what can happen when good people remain silent. We must empower our students to use their voices and take action when they witness discrimination or injustice, no matter how small. In terms of the legacy of the death camps for today's younger generation, it is essential that we continue to educate and raise awareness about the Holocaust. This includes visiting memorial sites, hearing survivor testimonies, and sharing experiences, like my journey on the March of the Living. By doing so, we can ensure that the memory of the Holocaust remains alive and that the lessons learned from this dark chapter in history continue to guide us towards a future of tolerance, understanding, and peace.
So, I'm a grandson of a Holocaust survivor. My grandfather was from Frischtok, Poland. Growing up in New York, I learned a lot about the Holocaust from my grandfather, his survivor friends, and in 1996, as a senior in Spanish River, I had the opportunity to go on the March of the Living, which is a trip that takes young Jewish boys and girls to Poland for a week to visit Warsaw, Krakow, Auschwitz, Birkenau, Treblinka, and Majdanek, which are concentration camps. And afterwards, you take a trip for a week to Israel. When I had the opportunity in 1996 to go, it was a very eye-opening experience. It put my grandfather's stories into context. It gave it a visual. And I was amazed at what I saw. I will say, as a 17-year-old kid, I was not able to grasp the gravity of what that trip really was until later on in life. And later on in life, I had the opportunity to also go back as a chaperone in 2016. And for me, it was a unique experience because I got to compare and contrast the two trips, and going back as an adult, you really see what the enormity of that opportunity is. Going to the different camps really was probably the most eye-opening experience for me. Majdanek was the worst of the camps that I visited, and in '96 I was 17 years old, and we're pulling up to Majdanek, which is across from the city of Lublin, and our tour guide is telling the story of the town of Lublin and the Camp Majdanek, how at that time it could have been operational within 48 hours. They could have had that camp up and running again within 48 hours. And he's telling the story about the citizens of Lublin, and makes a comment that the people who lived in the city across the street had no idea of what was going on in the camp. And that kind of triggered me a little bit. I got visibly upset and questioned the tour guide of how people who were living across the street from a death camp had no idea what was going on. The smell, the truckloads of people coming in, the amount of people being burned, all these things would have been noticeable. And his answer to me was, in 1939, Lublin wasn't a city, it was a town. And that just made me a little bit more upset. After that, the idea of staying silent had always resonated with me. When we talk about see something, say something. And I always wondered what would have happened if people in Poland and people in Germany would have just spoke up and united against hatred. And I lived my life with that mindset. My grandfather, like I said, is a survivor. He lost 5 brothers. His father, his stepmother, his entire family. So for me, it was personal, and given the opportunity several years ago, I was in a situation where I had the choice to remain silent and allow a institution to dictate what will happen, or speak up on behalf of a group of people who were being targeted and marginalized. And I chose to stand up at the risk of my own job, at the risk of my own child losing his opportunity to attend a prestigious school. I decided that staying silent is the wrong choice, and the entire time that decision was made was because of my grandfather. I thought about him the entire time. I thought about his family. I thought about what he went through, living in forests for 3 years, being part of the partisans, freeing Jews from Nazis, constantly having to survive a horrific time. So I couldn't keep my mouth quiet. I had to open my mouth and I had to speak up. And no matter what the result would have been, I knew that I got the strength and the courage because of what my grandfather went through. So the number one thing that I always believe is that people need to stand up for what they believe in. They need to, even if it's injustice, if it's the hard thing to do, they still need to take that step forward and say something, because if they don't, who will?
Homesick. I lived in the ghetto here for more than a year in Terezin, in the Black Town now. And when I remember my old home so dear, I can love it more than I did somehow. Home, home. Why they tear me away? Here the weak die, easy as a feather, and when they die forever. I'd like to go back home again. Makes me think of sweet spring flowers. Before I used to live at home, never seemed so dear and fair.
We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. Wherever men and women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must, at that moment, become the center of the universe.
It is up to us to keep these stories alive. It is our collective responsibility as a society to ensure that dehumanization, hatred, and genocide have no place in our world ever again. I want to say thank you to Ms. Brewer and WSRH, Mr. White and our band, Mr. Kowalski and our chorus, the many students who contributed to this video, Ms. Castellano and our administration for allowing us to share this with you today, but most importantly, you, our students. Thank you for your attention this morning and for bringing me hope every day that you will be the generation that will once and for all remove hate from the world that our children, my son, will grow up in.